Before the first star ever burned, before matter learned to shape itself into galaxies, something made a choice. Not a simple, random cosmic fluctuation, but a necessary and specific decision. Ancient religions call it the one, the all, the good. Today, modern astrophysics simply call it the Big Bang. This creative force launched an event so vast that left us in a void. A vast cosmic bubble where gravity thins and expansion accelerates. But the ancients called it something else, this cosmic ocean. What if the universe we see surrounding this Milky Way galaxy was crafted on purpose, a cosmic nursery where civilization could rise, fall, learn, and thrive under guidance of these guardians, these creators of our reality? Welcome to Chasing the Past. Today, we look at this, the KCB void, and how it pertains to ancient mythology, religion, perhaps historical records of the miraculous. Welcome back, guys. Thank you very much for being here. I found this one to be a fun, I call it, even if it's, just me thinking out loud in a crazy way, it's still, I think, a fun thought experiment, which is trying to take the science of our current understanding of physics, the world, the universe itself, and mesh it with some of these cool ancient texts. And I know people have done this in the past with, especially this Anunnaki type, Zecharia Sitchin type, architectural sci-fi fiction. I think it'd be better if we go over, I had to make a layout. So we're going to go through the void, the scientific discovery from, the James Webb and the potential to be in a black hole, which in itself is just mind-blowing. And then from the evidence there, we're going to work through into this cosmic ocean, this primordial ocean myth. And, we're going to start as far back as we can and then move through it and see how, we've slowly kind of lost or forgotten some of these ancient, textual practices. Göbekli Tepe, again, boom, hits me right there, where you cross from one side of the galaxy to the other, right? There's some interplay in some of these. And then, of course, if this primordial ocean then got created, something had to monitor and or guide. And so then we get into these gods, guardians, divine figures. What did the primordial entities that made the universe produce? And then at the end, maybe this I don't know if we have enough time for it. If not, I'll do a separate one. But I think maybe going through these maybe even opens up the potential or possibility of this new, UAP phenomenon, this modern, non-human intelligence question that we're all struggling with. And, I really just kind of want, I guess that's the right way to say it. I kind of really just want to walk through it. No, this, that, this, right, wrong. Just walk through the stuff, the evidence. Why did I say it like that? And so another key answer, if we get to it, if not, I think it'd be a separate, I might do it anyways, just do a separate one while I'm down here and then schedule it for Sunday. But how this ancient guardian gods type thing plays into maybe the UAP phenomenon, I kind of made a flow chart. So it's like divine beings descend from the creation of the universe. These guardian figures then help, they give knowledge, they, cross the boundary between the unknown and then the spiritual unknown and then, the material. So they cross that boundary and then civilization leaps forward, we change, we learn, we adapt. But then when we get to the point of losing it, is that catastrophe? Is that just, we're so lost in how we see the world that we forget, kind of that flow, which I think is I think that's beneficial if we look at it that way. in finding the stuff because we all know the general idea of, the Big Bang. We also can't see beyond it, right? So I found this picture that I think is really good with the event and then everything from it. And so in my mind, I need to realize, how does this void play into this idea of a Big Bang and then the creation of all of these things? Is the void a part of this natural process? Could it have been done? We'll get there. But anyway, so all I got was the Big Bang as, of course, the origin and the structure of what we see as the universe. So that by itself, let's just say it does, with these dense ripples through space, forms these voids. One of them that we're in is this KBC void that I found. And so that then grows into this cosmic web. And then with the voids being under such dense space, the matter is kind of almost pulled away from it, right? And so it means that our Milky Way is in this huge void. One, it gives you this larger expansion rate than we thought. But to us, because we're being pulled through by gravity's density, time is different. It's reality can sometimes be stranger than fiction. And so it almost, to me, it feels like if you're going down a well and then we're at the bottom of it and we just keep sinking, it's going to be harder and farther to get out as we deepen through gravity. And so then it gets bigger and the void grows. And so a fun speculation thought experiment is, test your boundaries. I'm a big advocate for testing mental boundaries. I just to get in this right mindset to do this, like, am I going to push my own boundaries? And one of those was, there's a fun speculative idea that I was able to think up and come up with, which is that maybe this Big Bang event that we cannot see past isn't necessarily just like a random fluke, right? It's a divine, maybe it's a gift, I guess you could say that, but a safe area for us to grow, right? Maybe we're too primitive and dangerous, just like in most of these ancient stories we'll get into, that they're able to, let's say, peek in from time to time, right? Like look over the well, see what's going on, and then go, they seem to be okay. Maybe now tie into this UAP phenomenon and let's just say nuclear activity, nuclear warfare. That might be a big uh-oh if they're looking in the well, right? If they're seeing us do this, we are, by the, if I'm these figures that I made up in my head, peeking in the well, I'm looking and going, they are by themselves. They're in this void. We've made it so that they could develop safely before they bring any harm to, let's say, any other races doing something similar, right? You can tie in this UAP thing, but still be concerned, right? Especially if they have been in these ancient stories, seeing us rise, fall, grow, build, thrive with huge civilizations, and then suddenly we're like, they got to the point where they have these big cities and they're all together. There's a ton of them. And they still can't figure this out, right? That's kind of where the mind goes. And I think tying those two together, I will admit, it's a thought experiment that it makes me sound crazy. But also, I keep finding things in reality and in real life that just seem more strange than fiction. And maybe that's just the case too. But I bring all that to the surface right at the get-go because we can all look that up. We have a computer, you have a computer. You can go look up, new discoveries about the Big Bang, about the early light from the universe, about these voids that pop up, and we happen to be in the middle of one. And to me, when I was reading those things, it sounded a whole lot like these primordial waters. Whether you're in, the firmament, right? If you're reading, biblical text, if, Genesis, or just calling it this primordial water. And so I'm going through. So the layout would go like Egypt, Sumerian, probably, the Levant, ancient Near East. And then you get kind of into Greek. And then that's kind of where we lose some of these things in terms of the depth of the primordial waters, and then we move into gods, right? The things, the guardians that peek in from time to time, if that makes sense. In going into the ancient descriptions of the cosmic ocean, the great chaotic waters, the cosmic waters, cosmic oceans, all of these things, some of them are really, it's funny actually, because when you read them, you can read them as if they're like a mythological story. But if you read them, it also is just more of a creative, poetic way to say all the scientific stuff that we've already gone through. So in not even early, I'll just go all the way back. I'll go to the Sumerian. So in ancient Sumerian, and then eventually you get, the Babylonian, then you get to Akkadian. But at least in Sumerian and Babylonian, right, they describe a world arising from the primeval waters, right? Now, these, I should do more research on this. I don't know why they are, maybe it's simpler to understand a very complex, not theological, scientific approach to something. We've just been raised in scientific, method the entire time we've been alive. So maybe that's easy to us. So maybe you have to deify, these into, male, female to understand, or at least get a message across that sticks. Does that make sense? So Apsu is this fresh water, this personification of the male god, the male, version in this myth, while Tiamat is the female version, and she's this cosmic saltwater ocean. Right? Usually something that's interesting too is a dragon or a snake of some kind, where the snake eating its own tail is what I think of, which is like a spiral of the universe. And again, no light pollution. You probably look up back in those days and you would see kind of the entire cosmos above your head. And so Tiamat then embodies this formless, chaotic potential of this uncreated world, right? Just this dark chaos where there's matter and things that are there, and then that's all it is. Also, ironically, now with the new textual change, proper textual change in scholarship on Genesis, that is the same thing for God as well. So there already is this chaotic, cosmic thing. He just decided to create in it. So instead of in the beginning, it's like when he decided to create, almost, is how the new textual reading of that goes. And so Tiamat embodies this, but the younger gods eventually they battle, right? And so this god figure named Marduk defeats her, splits her body in two, and then separates the heavens from the earth. And to me, that very much sounds like separating the beyond, the higher up divine things that seem far away and untouchable to us from the material. And that would be a story in my mind that separates the heavens and the earth, right? God created the heavens and the earth, right? It separates both. This story also reflects that in my eyes. And so Tiamat is this, figure for their great primordial, formless void world waiting, and then such a battle, cosmic battle, which also could be referencing to a big explosive Big Bang, cuts it in two and separates the material from the spiritual. Nun in ancient Egypt, right, was the idea that this deity where the universe was originated from this vast, dark, endless expanse. Interesting. Of primordial waters known as Nun or Nu. And so, it wasn't nothingness, which I think is interesting because we do get that prior. Then you get Egypt, which says it's not nothingness, but the state of formless matter, right, that held the potential for life. So the materials are in place, kind of floating about, but no one's using it yet. You got a bunch of Lincoln logs, but no one's put the log cabin together, right? So Nun or Nu was believed to surround this chaos. And even after creation, sometimes this force itself, this deified force, will eventually destroy existence and then return everything to nothing, like a blank slate again, which kind of is, either, it sounds like by our methods of trying to calculate the universe, this eventually will happen, or, a galaxy will get absorbed by another galaxy eventually. And, or, just off the top of my head here, or it does sound like if this is describing putting us into the void in this story, sounds like the potential for the void to just close up on itself and then us get merged with everything else. And, just, again, I have no notes on that, just top of my head. So there's also, I forgot Hinduism. I forgot we were going to go through the Vedic scriptures. So like early Vedic texts, they have I did not practice these words. I sneeze. Yeah. Excuse me. So again, I've not practiced these, words. I'm no expert in any of this stuff, but there's salty ocean. Looks like Salilia. Anyway, it's in the Rig Veda, describes the original state of the universe as an unrecognizable dark salty ocean before the emergence of existence. So another shared story. Two of the ancient civilizations that we love and we always study, and then I do think that the Vedic scriptures and some of the Hinduistic ideas get kind of overlooked, and I really personally want to dive into those, take a look, and bring them to the forefront, and maybe, because it's also one of the oldest religions out there as well. I think it is, if you count. Again, here's where you get religion and mythology kind of mixed. But their idea, which then develops from this salty ocean, and then later develops into something that I found was called the Ocean of Milk. Yeah, Ocean of Milk, where Vishnu rests upon this primordial ocean. Looks like Kshira Sagara. And so as Vishnu sits on top of it, he rests on the ocean and he dreams the world into being. So that also does sound kind of like Genesis to me, where God recognizes there's a primordial ocean, it's chaotic, nothing's together yet. I'm going to start making stuff in creation, which also kind of ties into this whole NHI, is this void on purpose, yada, 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 because some of these traditions also mention the god of whatever practice then decides to create from the chaotic explosion. And so a fun interplay is, or a fun question, I guess I would say, is, does the ocean get made if the Big Bang is the event that they talk about, this primordial ocean, if that's what we're talking about, if that's the purpose that we're describing as like life shows up, let's say that was an organic process. What isn't then becomes the ones that are above all, that worship everything, or that worship everything, that we worship above everything, above all things, then becomes the one who creates the earth, people, and everything on it. And so to me, that does sound like this event doesn't just matter to us, it matters to everything, every star, every universe, the whole 9 yards. And then someone decided to use it once they, essentially became aware, to then dream, build, create, do something with the material to make the world. Tehom also is both Canaanite and it's, Hebrew. The etymology of that is like the deep in Genesis. So like Tehom and the deep, they feature the same concepts of this watery chaos. And then of course, you have, we'll get into all those, but let's see, scroll down here. I think I jumbled up the notes here a little bit, but you get some of these also in like Greek, especially like the like Orphic Greek cosmogonies. So like hydros is this primordial waters, and then like thesis is creation, which I think is funny. Like a PhD thesis, like my thesis paper, is, those are the responsible first entities who then create other beings, but then they work together with like Gaia, so like mud or earth or the planet, right? Like they work together with the planet to make these things later. So even Greek influences do have this type of it's just on the same wavelength. I'm finding it amazing that I understand because it's difficult to try to work into multiple things into one idea, and it does take some time, but because most people are experts on Egypt or Sumer or Greek or Hinduism or Vedic scriptures, right? There are just things that we parcel out, but I think maybe unifying fields together to get a deeper understanding of maybe how collective we used to be, because at least maybe in terms of tradition, maybe there's something that they are looking at in the sky. It doesn't have to be like a being creates something and comes down and talks to all these people differently. Could, maybe a possibility, but also maybe there's something very physical in the sky, in the universe, that they're pulling inspiration from, and they all have a general look. And so I think that's something worth exploring. So now that we've got the waters out of the way, this primordial ocean mythology, religious practice that's still in all of our scriptures. So in the introduction statement, that's like, okay, we have an agreeing mythos here. How do we work into that? And the thing that ties into most of those would be, divine beings, the gods themselves, emanations, these originators of civilization, right? The ones who come down and the ones that actively work with us to build the world we live in, right? To create a physical world for us to live on, live in, and live together with. Right, that sounds good. And of course, we're going to go from oldest forward. So Sumerian, right? You have, of course, everyone knows about, Epic of Gilgamesh, but also one that I have, it's a translation of upstairs, but it's the Eridu Genesis, which describes how, the gods created humanity and then established cities in early Mesopotamia. And so you have gods like, An, Enlil, Enki, Nintur. They create humans from clay, right, to establish humanity's fundamentals as servants. Some of them even use, blood and the clay, right? And take that how you will. But it's this like authority or hierarchy of like gods in this Eridu Genesis. And so, Enlil might act as this like supreme master of the universe type deal, but who I guess essentially is like the decider of human fates. But Enki is like the opposite side, who's like wisdom and influence and, this, dynamic, I don't know, it's like a power structure that's super dynamic, but also like not absolute. And I think even in the oldest text, I think it's interesting to note that even they see this crazy chaotic thing as not being as structured and more dynamic than we in the modern world would think it to be. And, in that story, there's the flood where Ziusudra makes it. He's kind of like the Noah of the story, but he makes it to like Dilmun, which is this place of eternal life, right? And then so from that, whatever that struggle is between humans and the gods, now they have divine mercy because now he has eternal life in the story, right? He lives in Dilmun, which is so cool that it's a real place. But from this pact, the gods are now more directly associated with the first cities. So you have like Enki with Eridu, you have Shurpak with Ninhursag the god, and then you're linking this divine favor after this pact established by Ziusudra, who earns eternal life, with regular urban life and then divine kingship, which also you're going to get in Egypt with the pharaohs. So that's also a cool little interplay which I think is why some of these stories are super interesting, because even the gods had an idea of how to run, govern, and guide, realize that we have the potential to step outside of some bounds, and they go, maybe we underestimated these things. Maybe they have more to them. Let's see if we can show them how to, and again, you have the ones of the divine council and the Elohim in Hebrew, where that's not argued either. And they do that. They return on their mistakes, essentially. And they go, maybe we underestimated these things. And so with eternal life, we're going to continue with that. Sorry, so I knew we'd get back to that. So in their, mythos, this was like a mythical, pristine paradise, like the land where sickness, death, and evil, it does not exist, right? It has abundant waters, which are important for crops, growth, all this kind of thing. And they're associated with, sorry, I'm trying to go off memory. Yes, I said with Enki, because I didn't put it in my notes, but I just read it and I go, I'll mention that real briefly. But it serves as this destination point for people who earn immortality. So Ziusudra is one of those people, and they get to go here and they have eternal life with key concept Mesopotamian ideas in there about what that looks like. And when reading it, it sounds a whole lot like the Garden of Eden. And so eventually, as texts go on, it becomes a physical garden in Genesis, and then we get, St. Augustine with the fall of man and how sin began and all this kind of stuff that later develops, and then boom, now it becomes a spiritual Garden of Eden. But they already had a spiritual Garden of Eden. It sounds like they're just calling it heaven. And so this Eridu story, this Eridu Genesis, dates to the first, at least the earliest ones that I could find, was 2150 BCE. And then assuming that it was earlier, before, let's say, the Babylonian dynasty, say it was, we have scraps, I call them scraps, but fragments of Sumerian tablets that are still pretty close to the Babylonian. So if you go back, then it's 3000 BCE. Oh, the other note, I just put it here real quick, was I also found a reference to the Absu being the freshwater depths, where the realm of wisdom, where Enki lives. So I just found it interesting that the current NHI phenomenon and UAP phenomenon revolves around water, and they have a place where Enki lives that also revolves around the Absu, which is the freshwater depths. In ancient Egyptian, the one that I think is most important to this mythos is the Ennead gods, which is the group of 9, right? The 9 primary deities, which would be, so let me start over. In ancient Egyptian, they have the Ennead gods, which is this group of 9, the famous 9 primordial primary deities that create the descendants from the creator god Atum, Atum. And that is Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set. I want to pronounce this right. Nephthys? That sounds better. So it forms this core divinity of a family structure of these myths and these afterlife beliefs. And that would be, again, from these pyramid texts, which are about 2400 BCE. And, the creator god who emerged from what? Nu, right? The primordial waters. That's where Atum comes from. And so even from the general base of these really old stories, you get a deity that then is formed from the universe itself being created, that then interact in the world, that then breed gods, that then, now they can kind of form the world in different ways. They can shape it to the way it needs to be for us. In Hinduism, the oldest parts of its books, the roots are the Vedic tradition. So it'd be the Rig Veda, the Sanskrit, hymns, and like, I guess it's just the hymns and poems from 1500 to 1200 BCE. And it emerges from the same idea, right? We already went over it kind of early on real quick, but they have this emergence idea from the cosmic ocean seeking purpose, where Vishnu sits on top and then dreams the world, creates the world, thinks, and then the world is made. So that's another common thing both there, and then you get down in the ancient Near East. So we get down to Canaanite religion, right, or the early polytheistic faiths in the Levant. And very much tied, all of these also are very much tied to, well, I can't say all. I do know that Canaanite, Egyptian, and then Sumerian all tie around agricultural cycles, right? That's a big deal. That's how you make food, right? They didn't have factories like we have factories, right? Maybe they did. Maybe just in a cooler looking motif. But the Ugaritic texts are really significant in this one, where, that's late Bronze Age. So, like, right, it's before the collapse, and it's a miracle that we even have these, which is cool, because they reveal this, Canaanite, previously unknown mythology and religion. Like, what does their literature look like? What does their daily life look like? And we found them, we have them. And so this early, cuneiform script does have a Semitic type. It has a Semitic tie-in to Hebrew and then eventually Aramaic. So it offers crucial context in the region that we did not have before. And it's this cultural shared tradition that it'd be fun to go into the Ugaritic text specifically and read more, but they were found in Syria. And so they give us a new understanding of anything in that ancient Near East, kind of Semitic West, I almost said West world, West Semitic traditions that were previously gone, especially since the late Bronze Age just essentially collapses the world, which, from what we can gather, is, don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, a place where things are very much shared back and forth. And that later forms this polytheistic system of like the pre-Greeks, the early Greeks. So, Crete is a big one. And in these texts, we don't know a lot, because we just haven't, linear A and B, like, we don't know. It's super early Greek, and there's no way to go into it. So there's no Rosetta Stone for these texts. But from what we can gather is there are similar ties to, like, Poseidon. And then there's another one that I found, which would be, it's like Pontus. And, the one I gathered was that is their primordial god who was the sea. So Booyah, another primordial sea concept but theirs it feels more physical. It does, because it comes out of, it sounds like the fresh waters, right? Like the Abzu, because it comes from Gaia. So the earth itself spring, like a natural spring that creates the waters. And that's this Pontus. And I really, really wanted to get farther into this. We're already kind of pushing boundaries for this one, so I might have to layer up some of the other fancy stuff for next week, because I want to keep these. I don't want to do I love the long formats, but I want to make them something you can take notes from, digest, and then work with. And, the Orphic traditions is another one. So, like, on my list is Orphic traditions, Ugaritic texts. But in these Orphic, stories, we already talked about Hydros, we already talked about the Thesis, but from Gaia, they produce these primordial beings that then become the gods later. So, like, Kronos is an example. And then I remember learning in my history class where Aphrodite is born from this sea foam, where the story's kind of crazy, but like the genitals were severed from the sky god Uranus, and well, if that's not an innuendo, I don't know what is. Okay, I'm gonna throw that out there. And they were cast into the sea, and then these stories have these ancient early roots in these pre-Greek Minoan and Mycenaean religions, and from there, then you get, this idea of chaos, the original void, and then these other primordial beings like Gaia or Earth, and like the abyss, like Tartarus, like that's where those ideas come from. The final like pin on the hat, which is like where does it go with Greeks in this, concept, then you get to this very complex system of like the many Gnostic traditions. But the thing in those Gnostic traditions is very Platonic in the idea of like the good or the all that he would call, this divine thing that you can never understand, which, this transcendent God almost that descends, that doesn't interact with us. But in order to interact, he makes spiritual beings. So not archons, but aeons, A-E-O-N-S. And so these aeons are part of this transcendent like reality where, well, yeah, I guess that's true, where the archons represent the opposition. So aeons are part of this complex transcendent being. It's spiritual. And then archons are these ruling forces that are opposite here on Earth. And to Gnostics, they created this universe, which gives you this cool void interplay picture of like, oh, they created us in this bubble, and our job is to escape this reality, because it's not the real one. It's not God, and it's not anything, spiritual. And they sound like angels almost. And those really get tied into a lot of other things, because they also pull from other things. And so it's not like they're just making this up. I mean, could be, but most of the time it's not just like someone sitting down and then writing this story. They're hearing traditions, they're seeing things, there are people that are all around them with different ideas, and it seems very much like just this cool place and time where things all merge together and they build this giant structure of how we understand, or how these people tried to understand, the complexities of the things that they are looking at every day. And I think we miss that in modern day, and we don't seek that out. And it's a real tragedy, because you lock yourself into a position where you can't get out, right? I have to believe this, or I have to do that. It's like, well, you can still read something. You can still pull inspiration from anything. Again, you have to be in a proper mind, is what I would call it. Like, it's not a mindset, right? Because if it's just a mindset, then, right, you have to constantly keep doing it. Just read the text. Read them what they are. Like, the more I've read some of these, early Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian stories, I'm like, wow, that's powerful, right? Like, it was powerful to them too, right? I feel like we get in this habit in the modern day to, oppose others rather than read it for how it speaks to them. How does that talk to you, right? We just get kind of locked into something. And I think it's a real shame. But these archons, the flawed opposition to this transcendent, aeons above, and this true divine place they live, which would be their realm would be the pleroma. And, the entire structure of Gnosticism is about this dual force of like the beyond good spiritual, and then these archons. And so it's a very Platonic thinking, especially, I said Platonism, but specifically it's like Middle Platonic. And so you're getting like 100 BCE to like 3rd century CE. So like that's 400 years of this Middle Platonic thought. I guess 500, right? 100 to 0. No, it's 400. What did I read? Oh yeah, no, we're good. I'm reading from the earliest. That's fine. But it's something funny with Platonism. It's hard to find the kind of like starting points as it's like a philosophy. So from what I found is like, when did Neoplatonism start? Which was like Plotinus, and it says 3rd century, 4th century. So play with it how you will. Also, if I made a boo-boo mess up, I'm just going to own up to it. I think I messed up the math. Anyway, from my notes, we're pretty deep into it. And so to conclude and round off, to do another one that would be fun is, okay, if you read these stories for how they are, and you want to, I can do 2 things with these stories. The first one is I can for sure tie in these aeons, these archons, these emanations from the source being of creation. I can tie all of that both to anything you want to call like physics. So like if it's the good ultimate generator of the cosmos and he's transcendent and that's God, sounds like the Big Bang. If you want to go Gnosticism, because we're here on it right now, and you need to escape the material world, it also could be this reference to, well, how do you escape this world? It goes, you have to go beyond, the cosmos themselves. You have to, be born. I think that's really funny that we get that born again concept from some of these, because you have to die to yourself. A little bit of ego death almost, where you realize that in order to step out of those bounds, you can't be living so clearly in this material world that you get lost in what actually is beyond, just because it, seeing is believing type of thing. It's like, I don't know, there might be something. And that reminds me of the void. And so if these stories have beings, things that we would call spiritual things that they bend reality to their will. I'll go there. To me, that sounds a heck of a lot like any of this UAP phenomenon, right? The craft themselves bend reality. The beings give divine revelation to certain people, right? It's just, these stories have a ton to play with in terms of this phenomenon. Because to be completely open and clear, when I started going into this, that was the first thing I tried to attack and discredit, which was, is it just a hoax, or are people getting some type of divine miracle or revelation or insight into something, and why? Maybe this is just their job, right? Maybe they peek down the well, they look down, and they go, all right, there's some trouble. How can I best situate, humanity for this best potential that they can have? And maybe that's the play that we're getting. So I heard this a lot, where try not to immediately classify some of these phenomenal, experiences, or these, out-of-body NDEs or any of this stuff as being so negative. Because immediately now you're locking yourself in a position that you have to uphold. But also, that it just seems like that would be part of the plan. Part of the plan is to come down, communicate, guide us, talk to us. And maybe it was easier back then. Maybe in Sumeria it was easier. They were more open to receiving information or working with the gods hand in hand to like crop, do the fields, right? It feels just super cool when I read these stories, and it's as if, the gods or God is right next to you. And, I really do think that there's some things that we miss just because we're not listening. We're just not listening to one another. And, I appreciate you for being here to listen to this. So this next little bit, I'll cut it off here, start to edit, post it, and then in Sunday, we'll kind of dive into all this stuff prior that we've gone through here into how can I tie this into, the NHI experience, the non-human intelligence, the UAP, UFO world, and see if we get anything out of it. See if we can match anything up. And I just think it'd be really fun. So from this episode so far, right, we have we're going to have Sunday one, which is this NHI type discussion. Then for sure, we're going into Orphic traditions. And then we're going to go into the Ugaritic text, which I find fascinating. I have them numbered. I'm trying to keep it pretty scheduled. And then, let's just see what we can play with. Thanks for being here, guys. Keep seeking, keep learning. I'll catch you next week.